Well, welcome to our November edition of Shively Shoulders. A lot's happened, Patrick, since our October show. The election is concluded.
And the country's gone to, no, this is a big plate of crow that I am prepared to eat right here on television.
I'm just glad you didn't have to check into some mental health center for a little treatment of your depression.
I don't like to discuss my medical records, but let's just say I was physically ill last Tuesday night.
You have been a student of politics almost all of your adult life. Mm-hmm. You've been involved in campaigns, statewide campaigns, local campaigns. From your perspective, what do you think happened?
I'd like to ask our 5 million viewers that, but as a crusty old veteran of the political wars, what happened is, we'll generalize here and then we'll be specific. People, our fellow citizens, constantly, when they are upset with the status quo, want change. If you'll remember, Barack Obama's successful campaign was change, hope. There is a perception amongst our sisters and brothers that America is not where it should be. They take that out on the incumbent party. And Kamala Harris, who I believe was an absolutely a good, solid candidate, is the vice president of the current administration. If you want change, she never separated herself from that incumbent.
And a response on The View didn't help.
Her response, people, you and I both, because we love all this, read this from a political science standpoint as students of government and concerned citizens. But yeah, more and more commentators are pointing to a few things, one of which is her response to that question on The View, what would she have done different than Joe Biden? And secondly, sadly, I think the impact that the transgender commercials had in the last several days of the campaign. And in Indiana, where there's no reason to waste any money, because he's going to carry Indiana, how many times did we get that one?
Well, I tell you what, the other thing to keep in mind, this is hindsight, is always 20/20. But the Democratic Party had 2 months to put together a campaign for a candidate, whereas Donald Trump was working on his campaign, getting his ducks in a row, raising his money, doing his ads, building his team for over 2 years. It's hard to compete with that.
It is, but my thinking was, unlike the first time he got elected, the public knew him.
Right.
They knew the chaos. They knew that he had 34, I've said on this show before, if we ran someone for the local county surveyor job with that resume, 34 felony convictions, 3 more indictments pending, a bankruptcy, and a civil conviction for what was tantamount to rape, they wouldn't get elected county surveyor. So we could have run, I'm convinced, an ordained minister against Donald Trump this time. And I don't think it would
I hope
matter.
somebody, a respected academician, will write a book about the phenomena of this 2024 race and of Donald Trump from January 6, 2021 to where he ends up today as the president-elect. You're asking about what you would like to talk to our 50 million.
5 million.
5 million.
I don't exaggerate, only 5, not 50.
All right. We've heard from them. They have some questions.
We do.
Want us to ask. Why don't you take the first one on the local election?
I will take this local one, but we do want to stay more, and we will work all of this in. We got plenty to talk about in the national. We've got the state, and we have the local.
Take a national question.
No. I think all of these are good.
Okay.
Why are races like county recorder and county coroner partisan? For all of you that are just now tuning in our old days before we were the Antiques Roadshow, we used to have a live 1 hour where you could call in. We suggested to our producers and our $1 million sponsors, we ought to hear from our viewing public. We know you're out there. Thank you for sending us these questions. Why are races like county recorder and county coroner partisan? Being largely administrative, why make them elected positions and not just department heads like the city controller? That's from TJ. Thank you, TJ. The fact is, if I thought our politics was based upon resume qualifications, and that sort of thing, I would think it doesn't matter. But I tend to agree with you now. The surveyor ought to have some experience surveying, and the coroner probably ought to know a little something about anatomy. So why are those elected? I think it's historical. I don't have a problem with what you're suggesting.
There is a historical provision in the Constitution of Indiana, may explain why the coroner is elected. The coroner is the only public official that can arrest the sheriff.
Now see, that's why you tune in to Shively and Shoulders right there, because I've lived 71 years and I didn't know that.
It's true. Doesn't explain
The coroner can arrest the sheriff.
Yes.
And tell him he's dead?
Or tell him well, he's full of whatever. But yeah, the coroner under the Constitution is the only public official that can arrest the sheriff.
I had no idea. Let's talk just for a second. On election night, I had to be revived and was physically ill. But I'll tell you what got me through the next day and has me back to my own cute and jovial self.
Not Jack Daniels.
Not Jack Daniels. That's a good idea. When I saw the popular vote,
Yeah.
this time it wasn't the Electoral College that bailed out the Republican parties. 8 of the last 9 elections, it was the Electoral College. This time, you didn't just vote for him down there in the Confederacy. Every battleground state,
Right.
every state that was supposed to matter, the blue wall, as it were. You know, this time, when he wins the popular vote, and it's not going to be 5 million, it's not, Hillary beat him in the popular vote by 3 million. That's about the margin he's going to have. And you got to say, my fellow Americans have spoken. Then you buttress that with the fact that you want to change to the point where you now have put in the red column the Senate. Today we learned pretty much the House. You've got the third branch of political government, the Supreme Court. So, Your Honor,
Yes, sir.
a person who's devoted your life to the rule of law.
Yes, sir.
Where do you think the rule of law is now fixed in this scenario?
Well, in this scenario, contrary to your comments about the Supreme Court, I think the courts are going to be the bulwark to keep this democracy, this republic together. They're going to be the ones to enforce the rule of law. And I think that's going to be the balancing challenge for the court, not just the Supreme Court, all the courts. You
The
disagree?
Supreme Court has showed us their ideological preferences, first granting him essentially immunity for anything he can say was part of my
That's not really
presidential
That's not really
duties.
exactly correct.
And we can go through the rest of their
The Supreme Court
decisions.
says you start. It was a decision that was not ripe for their consideration.
Then we can go through their decisions along the Republican ideological guideposts, the dharma of the party, and one will find Roe versus Wade overturned, the administrative state undone with the Chevron decision being kicked out.
The Chevron decision was a great decision.
The Chevron decision was a great decision. The
Well,
case overruling it.
Overruling was a great. Let me tell you what. Hang on. Do you want this country to be? You're concerned about democracy, our republic being intact. The people that come up with these administrative rules and regulations are nameless, faceless bureaucrats. And the Chevron decision says, when it comes down to interpretation of an administrative regulation, the court, even the Supreme Court, is to defer to the interpretation by the agency. The only thing that the most recent case did away with Chevron simply said the court does not have to defer to the agency. The court on its own can interpret that rule or regulation. What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that is, in all due respect to Your Honor, I would rather experts in the Environmental Protection Agency make administrative rules and regulations governing clean air and clean water than you. Your degree, you'd be great in business and law, and you're very intelligent and you can read the law books, but you haven't studied the environmental regulations and rules and the effects of chemicals your whole life. Those are the experts in a country of 350 million people who ought to be making those decisions.
Unlike your perspective, Patrick.
Yes.
Leave it all to the experts, the bureaucrats. One of the foundations of this democracy, this republic, and a story I would say emblematic of what this country is all about and who actually rules this country is the jury system. We just recently saw 12 non-experts
Convict Donald Trump of 34 felonies. No, that's not what you're talking about.
In this state, we saw 12 lay people review evidence listen to evidence for over 2.5 months, and then deliberate for 19 hours to reach a verdict. Now we don't put that in the hands of experts. That's the most purest form of democracy right there.
Guilt and innocence, I agree with you, a big believer in the jury system, but I don't want to leave to that jury the chemicals that should or should not be in the meat that I buy on the grocery shelf.
We'll move on to something else, but the court didn't say we're going to do that. We're going to look at the language of the rule, and we're going to get our interpretation, and not going to be deferring to any agency, not any nameless, faceless, unelected bureaucrat.
We digress.
Let's move on.
In the national election, the Republicans now have the Senate. We lose great people that spoke for working people who somehow we don't get their votes anymore. Sherrod Brown in Ohio. We have the House, but we just heard today, ladies and gentlemen, and you got to be feeling comfortable about this, there's going to be a new congressman needs to be appointed in Florida because Matt Gaetz, yes, Matt Gaetz, investigated for sex with 17-year-olds or something like that, is going to be your new United States Attorney General. Are you proud of that one?
I just don't believe it. I'm in shock. I just read about it on our way over here today.
How about the Fox News host that's going to be your Secretary of Defense?
Well,
he's a veteran. Is that the only qualification you need?
Well, he's been a talk show host.
You and I could be. I'm not a veteran.
Wait a second. But you could be available for the cabinet, right?
Well, I could be a cabinet. So be careful what you ask for, ladies and gentlemen. But you have the Senate and you have the House. You have one-party government, which takes us to the state of Indiana. And we'll get back to our viewer questions. We haven't forgot about you. Guess what? We don't have any guests but me.
Oh, I just heard all these TVs throughout our tri-state. Click to another channel. I don't know where to begin. But the Republicans need to be very, very careful. I'm talking to Hoosier Republicans. Yes, we have a supermajority again in the House and the Senate.
Yes.
We have a Republican governor.
Yes.
Going on, exceeding the 20-year domination by the Republicans. But
we have someone who God speaks to as lieutenant governor, a heartbeat away from the governorship.
But the Republicans have two, I would say, Achilles heels to worry about that could bring the party down.
Todd Rokita.
Todd Rokita had a press conference last week following the election to announce his priorities for the next year. One of those priorities was to reform the state Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission. Number one,
because it seems to me they slapped his hand.
What he claims was a frivolous claim. It was that a hearing officer was appointed, investigated, independent hearing officer. He also badmouthed the president of the Disciplinary Commission, who happens to be a Republican.
There are certain people, his mentor has shown, your president-elect, that he's above the law. Todd is the law and sort of above it too.
I want to approach this about the Attorney General in a thoughtful manner, and not get into personalities and such, but I'm sorry, if you're going to be the highest ranking law enforcement, the attorney for the people of the state, you ought to at least know the law. There's no way constitutionally the Attorney General could do anything about reforming the Disciplinary Commission. That's solely by the Constitution within the purview of the Supreme Court.
That's what one-party government brings you. So pick one here on the state or the national, Judge, and tee off on it from one of our educated and loyal viewers.
All right. Good question here. Do you think we will ever see medical marijuana legalized in Indiana?
As someone who inhaled, does the statute of limitation run?
Problem is he's never exhaled.
We were both products of the late 60s and early 70s. It was a different time. Do you ever think we will see medical marijuana legalized in Indiana? My answer to that will be yes, after I'm dead and after 49 other states have legalized it and proven that it is in fact beneficial when used in a medical sort of way. We'll be the last state to get there, and we will do it only if Beckworth doesn't hear God argue against it into his ear, but there may come a day. Not in my lifetime.
I've talked to some law enforcement people about the concept of legalizing marijuana across the board, basically allowing it to be used for recreational purposes. And some top-flight law enforcement people have said, when they develop a science that's recognized throughout the world, so to speak, that you can do an on-spot test to determine whether somebody's impaired from the use of marijuana, that's the day law enforcement will come on board. Because, to be honest with you...
Kind of like we have for drunk driving
Exactly.
out there. Yeah.
Because, quite frankly, policing and enforcing the marijuana possession laws is a burden to law enforcement.
It is. And I think we've kind of pardoned or gotten a lot of people out of jail that during our growing up time, people were in jail for possessing small amounts of marijuana.
And
we've gotten away from that, I think.
The prosecutor of Marion County, the largest county in the state, when he was appointed to fill the vacancy of the deceased prosecutor who was holding the office at that time, the first day he was in office, he announced, "I will not prosecute possession of marijuana cases."
Yeah, it was crazy. In fact, Indiana's favorite governor, Mitch Daniel, had a little possession charge in his collegiate career. And you know what? As far as they're concerned, he turned out and did okay. He appointed some pretty good people to the bench. That was from BR. Perfect segue question here to the local election. It appears that partisanship, this comes to us from MG, is more combative nationally than ever. Do you expect that local leaders will be able to cross party lines to compromise in Indiana? Interesting question, because in the last election, the Democrats swept it in the city. Guess what? This election, every county office is Republican. Good question.
Locally, there's more fighting, at least there was until this election. There's more fighting within the Republican Party. And quite frankly, you saw with the county council, you saw even under Mayor Winnicky, whose party never dominated the city council, you saw a lot of cooperation. And when we used to do our old show, we start with national, state, and local. And when you and I got down to local issues, we agreed on 9 out of 10 things. I think the more local you get, the more opportunity there is for cooperation.
I think that's right, and I think that's because, Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. When we vote on local office holders, we vote on people who make sure that fires get put out, that police answer calls, that potholes get fixed, that garbage gets picked up. We want our local tax dollars in our own town. We can be pretty unified on what's best for Evansville. It's the issues, the ideological issues that begin to divide us, where you stand on a woman's right to choose, where you stand on government expenditures, those kinds of things. So I think locally, we're okay. You get away from that, you get to the next level of the state. The last legislature began to peek into the university administration and curriculum and tenure and things they have no business messing with. Removing books from the library. I'd rather leave that up to our local library board than some idiot in Indianapolis. So, partisanship is horrible nationally, medium bad statewide, but I think okay here.
Let's look at the two nonpartisan races that were on our local ballot.
Yes.
The school board appointed an individual to fill the vacancy when Amy Ward was convicted of a felony and by law had to resign, be removed. And they selected this particular individual to run for school board in the...
Former teacher.
It was in the, what is it, District 3?
West Side.
West Side District. 2 were to be elected out of 3. That person they appointed came in last, and one of the biggest critics of the school corporation, Mr. Vries, came in the top vote getter. What's going on there?
And
I'm not putting you on the spot, but...
Yeah, the school board is blessed to have the finest lawyer. Oh, wait. Let me say this. Well, I need to be careful here because I'm going to work and have worked for more than 35 years to whoever sits on the school board, and the public has spoken. I will say the local rag, the litter box filler called the Evansville Courier.
You used to represent.
I did back when they were a local newspaper. But the litter box filler maybe kind of got this right. Then they pointed out in an article as to why Amy DeVries won. Nobody worked harder.
Right.
and nobody raised more money.
Right.
Those two things in politics, whatever your agenda is, kind of equal success sometimes.
In the race for circuit court judge,
Yes.
we had two very well-qualified candidates, and Representative Ryan Hatfield, prevailed. What do you think happened there? Was this name recognition?
Yes, and here's what I would tell you. Those races, you got to get to the back of the ballot. A lot of straight punchers, which in county elections, the Republicans, have a 4,000, 5,000 vote plurality if you straight punches. I'm saying straight ticket voting, the Republicans have an edge.
Yeah.
That doesn't...
In countywide elections.
Yes, countywide. That doesn't get you one vote for judge or one vote for school board. Those have to be motivated people to get to the back of the ballot. Ryan Hatfield has been on that ballot.
Right.
Ryan Hatfield has been elected to public office before. And I know Molly Briles. She worked in my law office. Fine young lawyer. And I haven't been in her court, but I understand does a good job.
Does a great job.
The Bar Association rated her highly. The FOP, still missing a letter, need an L in there, flop, endorsement didn't do much.
By the way,
I would say that Ryan's name recognition.
Better watch your speed driving home.
Yeah, I was only kidding your officers. Next question.
Yes, sir.
National. Why were the total number of Democratic votes so vastly different from 2016 and 2020? Were votes suppressed, or do you believe certain demographics didn't show up, and why? That question's from SF, and that is a great question. Take a crack at that one.
Let's do it in reverse order. I don't think there were certain demographics that didn't show up. I think even though this was not the record turnout that people anticipated, it was still a very strong turnout nationally. I think goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We had a 2-year campaign versus a 100-day campaign. And whether you are a fan of the president-elect or not, he ran a campaign that made inroads with African Americans, made inroads with Latinos, Hispanics, working class people, the traditional base for the Democratic Party. I think the voters showed up, but they just gravitated towards the Trump ticket.
I think all of that's right. 2016, Hillary wins by about 3 million. That appears to me to be about what Trump's margin is going to be. In the popular vote, Biden wins by about 5 million, and Trump will certainly not get to that. Do I believe votes were suppressed? No. And what I'm proud of, us losers got to take honor in something. Today, Donald Trump was welcomed to the White House in a great tradition that all of our presidents have done for the president-elect, except one. Donald Orange-Headed Monster, who you just voted for, did not invite Joe Biden. But you know what? We're bigger than that. We won't file 60 lawsuits. Suppressed? I don't think they were suppressed. I think this was a pretty free and fair election. I think 4 years ago it was too. We won't attack the Capitol on January the 6th. There won't be anybody breaking windows at our Capitol building. We will accept this election, and there'll be a peaceful transition of power. So no, I'm not going to say Democrats, you lost because votes were suppressed. Finally, on demographics, you know what? They tell me that Trump made his biggest inroad. You hear about the Democrats, and in our lifetime, this is a complete reversal. It used to be country club Republicans and Democrats with the working union men. Now, we're somehow the elites. The college-educated people vote for the Democrats, and the working people vote for Republicans. His big gain was with young white males.
Right.
Young white
And that's why
males.
he focused on his campaign on these podcasts. Yeah.
The mistake I think we make, and I'll leave it at this, we got to get over thinking that all college-educated white males vote the same. All African Americans vote the same. All Latinos vote the same. All women are going to be motivated by the right to choose. You know what? That's not true. Black people vote for different candidates, just like pick your ethnicity, your religion, or your color. We got to quit stereotyping, and we got to start getting to people's what matters to them. And what I think matters to them, I read a great column, are local issues. Or most moms, dads, moms, their kids, broken homes, whatever, got to feed the kids, got to get them to school, got to hope they do their homework, got to find a job, got to buy the medicine. Those are the issues.
And decent housing.
And decent housing. And we're not communicating when we run the campaign on preservation of democracy and abortion or immigration and economy. Trump had these two, and they communicated. Preservation of democracy is awful important. A woman's right to choose is awful important, but it's not putting anything on the table.
Kitchen table.
Immigration and economy maybe is.
Kitchen table issues.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. The labor leadership was all for the Harris ballot. The rank and file were all Trump people.
Which is why the Teamsters nationally didn't, I think, endorse. I think nationally they probably would have been in the Democratic, but their membership was not. And they did not endorse anybody. Do you think it is likely that President-elect Trump, this comes from BS, he's constantly, do you think it is likely that President-elect Trump will adopt the policy recommendations, this is great, outlined in Project 2025 mandate for leadership? That was a big part of the Democratic convention, that big book. There's scary stuff in there.
The book put out by the Heritage Foundation.
One of them.
The president said that's not a mandate for him or a guidepost for his plans for his administration. I would think it would be disingenuous to think that he hasn't looked at that document and may use it as a reference point, but I don't think he's going to follow it point by point. He's got his own ideas.
It's early to know. If you look at some of his appointments, Stephen Miller, right there as his deputy advisor, chief of staff, Stephen Miller, I believe, is all over the 2025 booklet. Let's hope. We've got just a few things left. Thank you for these questions. Do you think he'll eliminate the Department of Education? He may try. I don't think he can get it done.
There's monies that federal monies that go into education, always have been. Whether it should be distributed through one agency is a question that needs to be explored. I think it's a fair question. How much time do we have, by the way?
About a minute and a half. Would it impact on K-12 students? Here's what I want you to know. 3 states had ballot initiatives, 2, 4, and 1 to make sure it didn't happen on school choice and vouchers. 3 states defeated it. People still believe, 90% of the people and their children are educated in public schools, and maybe the politicians will get the message that the answer to what's great about our public education system is focus on it, give it more money, and quit this resegregation nonsense.
Before we wind up here, I want to thank you. Yesterday you spoke to my poli-sci class at USI. You were tremendous.
Well, it's nice of you
You were
to say
very
that.
generous with your time. You always are. I appreciate that.
Thank
and also,
you.
a kind of a sad note, one of our colleagues, Susie Harding, a Harper Hornet, a Harrison
Absolutely.
Warrior, I guess we can still use Warriors, and a graduate IU Law School in Indianapolis, and a
Married
lawyer.
to a friend and acquaintance, Gerald Summer, who served honorably on the school board.
Susie donated her legal career focused solely on helping those less fortunate.
Legal aid, she had a great career, knew her back when was she in your class at Harper?
She was in my class.
Yeah, well, I happen to be a year older and a century smarter. But any event, Susie was a great one. We're sorry to see her go.
Yeah. All right.
We didn't need a guest. We only need you. Thanks for watching Shively Shoulders.